Let's talk naming conventions. Naming conventions are one of the most key pieces to unlocking the data behind the creative. To be able to understand what types of creatives are working within your account, what direction to take with creatives, and to be able to parse out and categorize what elements are working and which ones aren't. So pulling those higher level trends on your creative ads, pulling data behind it. Analogy-wise, how I like to think of this is imagine you have a bestseller book and we've got no title, no chapters within it. It would be really hard to know, what is this book about? How is this book categorized or grouped? Now, it could have amazing bits of information and learning within it, but it's really hard to understand and break down that learning. Similar to that, ad naming conventions are essentially how we are going to group and categorize your creative to be able to understand what different elements are working or not within it and how to then take learnings from it. So today's session, we are going to dive all into that, how to set up a naming convention for success, and we'll even dive into motion, and I'll show you how to start building out some reports based on those elements of naming. First thing we're going to do is pull up a naming template. We do have a free template within our Help Center that you can definitely take and make a copy of. I would highly recommend it. And that's what we're going to use for today's session. So if you just head to help.motionapp.com, you'll be brought to our Help Center. Click on that Get Started with Motion section. Scroll all the way down to the bottom. And at the very bottom, you'll see resources and templates. We're going to select Optimize Ad Naming - Creative Learnings Template. Once you open that, scroll down a little bit further and click in that little purple bubble there, access our creative learnings template here. From there, feel free to just click File, make a copy of that so you have your own version of it, and that's what we're going to be working off of today. The first step in this process is to do a brainstorming session. This is where I would have media buyers, creative teammates, creative strategists, whoever wants to join the session, dive in and start exploring what kind of things are within our ads currently. So, for example, do we have UGC creators or influencers sometimes? Are we doing podcasts with people and that's what we're using for ad clips? Do we have different events that we're pulling clips from and that's what we're making ads with? Just brainstorm a whole bunch of ideas of what we are trying right now and what different elements are a part of that. From there, we'll probably want to dive in even deeper with our creative team to understand what is happening within the assets creatively, meaning they'll have those deeper insights of why they're testing different things, such as, sometimes we do really fast-paced cuts versus we do like slow motion cuts, and we kind of do different styles and flows within the content. Sometimes we do really close-up versus far away. So those would be some of the different things that the creative team would know that they're testing, even if it's coming a little bit more intuitively to them, where they're just trying out these different type of creative styles or approaches. So jot down all of those ideas and then you'll have a good base to start and work from. From there, we're going to want to start breaking out these different ideas into columns. But one big tip I have, and it's something you're going to want to keep in mind as we're deciding which columns to break out, is number one, don't have too little, but also don't have too much. The best thing to keep in mind here is make sure what you're including is actionable. That is the most important thing. So with this insight on the creative, can we then actually take an action on it and move forward with those learnings? If we can't, you probably don't need to include it. So we're going to run through today a couple of different recommended columns you could use. But again, this is going to be very tailored to your own business and brand. So feel free to change these up as needed. So some couple quick examples here would be source. For example, do we have an agency who's making creatives, but then we also have our own internal team who's making creatives? Maybe we want to pull data behind, is the agency team doing as good of a job as our internal team, and vice versa. So source is a really cool one to track if there are those differentiation in where content comes from. Second thing would be format and or concept. So think of this as like, what is the general format or concept of our ad? Is it a UGC mashup style? Is it an unboxing? Is it a podcast? Is it a before and after? Is it a day in the life, a product demonstration? Start breaking it up into different types of formats or concepts that it could be bucketed into. Aside from that, then you've also got messaging, which is what is the general ethos of the ad? Are we leaning deeply into a problem that this product or app or whatever it might be is solving? Are we really leaning into like that fear of missing out on something? Are we really leaning into a benefit or the story of how this product was made, as an example? So what's the overall messaging? And then we can dive into hook. This is one of the most important pieces, I feel like, of an ad. This is what's going to get people to stop and watch your content longer and initially get that engagement and that excitement about what's happening within the ad. So diving into hook, 2 different ways you could do this. You could just generally break up hook in general, like this example. But sometimes how I like to think about it is hook visual and hook messaging. Hook visual could be like a very kind of like weird, shocking visual, but then the messaging could be very different for that exact same visual. What is the text overlay on it? What are we leading into with like a voiceover or copy on top of it? So splitting sometimes hook into hook visual versus hook messaging is a nice way to go about that. After that, we might also have different products that we sell, so we want to be able to track which products are showing within the ad. If you have more than one product within an ad, I usually recommend having like a multi-option here that you can then select and mention that we are showing multiple products. Talent or influencer, again, a really important one. Most of us are probably working with UGC creators or influencers of some kind for advertising. If that's the case, you will want to put an influencer/talent tab. It's just going to make it really easy to pull these insights out on motion, especially if we are working with some over and over again. We want to be able to see holistically, is that creator working better than some of our other ones we're working with? Gender could be another one as well too. Do we notice when we show males versus females within the hook or the asset in general, do we get a little bit more engagement or keep people watching longer? That can be a really interesting one. Age range too is another one that's fun to play with, especially if we do have an audience of people that kind of do spread out between multiple generations. Diving into age range is a really interesting one. For example, maybe you're a skincare brand that does sell to, a bit younger of an audience, but also a little bit of an older audience. When we show an older audience within those ads, do they resonate more with it? And we notice that it is getting served to maybe like an older demographic. So including these age ranges can be really fun. Asset length is one I would include only if you do have quite a variety in different lengths of time. For example, maybe sometimes we're running 15-second ads or 5-second ads, but then sometimes we're running 2-minute long ads. We probably want to be able to break out and see holistically, do these longer form ads work well comparatively to our short form content. Offer is another great one, especially if we are offering different types of offers throughout the year. You might want to track to see which offer is working better for you. Or if we're directing people to different landing pages, that's a good one to include. Last one on here is audio. So do we have music? Do we have a voiceover? Are we using some kind of a trending sound or nothing at all? So these are just some examples of things we might want to include within naming. Of course, this is going to be very custom and tailored to you. So take out any of these columns that don't make sense / add additional ones as needed. And the last thing to point out in here is that you'll notice we are using an identifier in front of all of these columns. So if we look at offer as an example here, we'll notice that there is an O: in front. That is indicating an offer. So I would recommend putting these in so you have your categories grouped out with that identifier piece in front. Now, you don't need to use the letter O. It could literally say offer dash, and then you have all your different offers after it. Just something in front that is consistent that will identify what this column is. I'm going to show you within Motion what this will unlock depending on the plan tier you're on, but if you are updating naming, throw it in there. There's no harm to it, and it could unlock a lot of automation on Motion side depending on what you have access to. Now, stepping over to the next tab, which is the ad naming generator. This is essentially how it comes to life. Once you've built out your glossary, whoever is going to be going ahead and adding the ad naming conventions on Meta or TikTok or YouTube side or wherever your ads are living, this is where it's going to be really, really easy to group and bucket your ad. So all they're going to want to do is come into here, select the first column, select whatever elements it is a part of the creative for all the different groups, / if there's a group that doesn't make sense to track, you can leave it blank, just keep going. And once you've completed that row, it'll then spit out an ad name for you. You just copy and paste that, put that into, let's just say Meta as an example, and your ad name is ready to go. The nice thing about the generator is it's going to keep it nice and consistent. So if, for example, we are tracking like why not to buy, making sure it's spelled exactly like this, no spaces in between, or UGC mashup versus like UGC mash or something like that. It's just going to keep that consistency because we've pulled from the glossary rather than having to manually type out each time. Up here in the separator section, just to point out, you can swap this as well too. Say you're usually using a dash instead of an underscore to separate these different sections. Feel free to swap that to whatever you guys are currently using. That way you can keep that consistency. But with this naming sheet, you will be ready to go. And I know it takes a little bit of time to get this figured out and get things in order, but trust me, as I say, I've worked with a lot of our largest brands here at Motion. This is one of the biggest unlocks to being able to pull the data behind your creative. So very, very, very well worth it to adjust. And even those who don't adjust it right away usually come back and they're like, okay, we're ready to update naming. And that's when we go through a whole entire process of going through this with them. All right, so let's dive into Motion. I'm going to show you how this comes to life in the platform and what kind of insights you can start pulling out from here. So let's use the example of creator. Imagine I am working with, let's just say 20 different creators, and I usually work with them consistently, and maybe my plan is also to work with another 50 to 100 creators over the next year. It's going to be a lot of different variables to track, but I want to have really close insights into which creators are working and how they're performing over time. Within Motion, now that I have those elements within my naming conventions, I can click to create a report, and I'm going to hone in on the comparative analysis for this example, because this is where naming becomes really fun. You can use naming in any one of the reports, but this one is where it becomes really, really useful. So if I click on the arrow here and I click to create a custom group, this is where I can start adding filters to group and bucket ads out by. So if I know my first influencer name is Bumblebee, and my second creator name is Optimus Prime, so I'll just put Prime in here. And I also know I have Wheeljack. So these are my 3 creators, let's just say, as a quick example that I'm working with. I can now see holistically which creator is working better for me. I can also swap metrics, so I can get a little bit of a deeper insight into how well they are returning back holistically. As an example, I can see Optimus Prime, we put a ton more spend into, almost double the spend in some of these cases. So they are scaling really well for us and returning back pretty nicely, but definitely lower than the other 2. Now, maybe as Bumblebee scaled up, that 4.03 would drop, but we can say, oh great, all of our creators are returning back pretty well. Bumblebee's actually a little bit higher. Do we want to lean into getting Bumblebee to make more content for us, let's just say. Now, I might also throw on some other different metrics like thumb stop, and I could say, wow, Bumblebee is actually capturing attention really well for us. That is our highest thumb stop. So whatever is happening within the first 3 seconds of Bumblebee's ads, that's capturing attention really well. Do we pair that with something else within other ads? But knowing the style of content for capturing attention well is Bumblebee's content. What can we learn from that? So having these higher level insights, like I said, could really allow you to pull that data behind the creative and understand what specifically is working and what's not working, / what action do we want to take from there. So we can start to build these comparative reports for any one of those elements, imagining what different hooks are we running. Is there one hook that's doing a bit of a better job capturing attention than other hooks? What kind of messaging are we leaning into? Do we notice we get more sales when we lean into problem messaging versus like benefit messaging? So all of these are data points that you can start to pull out, holistically grouping your ads together to be able to know which direction to lean into and what action to take from there. Now, as you saw in this scenario of different influencers, imagine I go back to what I said earlier and we are working with 100 different influencers. As you can see, it would be a pretty big pain point to come in here and have to click add group, add group, add group, and continue that process for 100 creators. It's a little bit manual, and you'd of course have to come back in each time if we were working with a brand new influencer, making sure we didn't forget to add them, keeping them up to date. It's great that we can pull these high level views, but that is definitely a manual process if variables are changing quite a lot. what we can do now in Motion with that identifiers piece. So similar to like when I mentioned offer, we had that O colon, which was telling us that the, O colon represented an offer. We can now automate a lot of this process within Motion. So if you click up here in the top left menu and go to workspace settings, under naming conventions, this is where you're going to be able to tell our platform what these different elements or identifiers mean. So if I click into edit, I'll be able to see here for an example, I colon is what I put in here, is an influencer. Go ahead and find me all the influencers I'm working with. So imagine a list of 100 that would pop in here. So by doing this, what we can now do within Motion is if I go to create that comparative report, instead, I can say, build me a comparative report based on influencers, because I just set that up within my properties. And now it's going to build me a report looking at all of those different influencers. So automating this process is just going to keep things, first of all, up to date. It's going to be pulling in new variables over time if you do add new elements within your naming conventions. And it's just going to make sure that you're not missing anything as well too. So that automation piece is really fun and makes it a lot easier to pull these insights over time. So that is a quick run through of naming conventions, why it is so important, and why it is something that I see as one of the most key pieces to unlocking what is happening creatively and pulling data behind it.